In this episode of Derp Star, I've added several phases to the black hole boss fight. Initially, it blinks for several seconds, then it starts to grow as it absorbs bumpers, which is what I added in the last video. Once the black hole reaches critical mass, it collapses with an explosion of items and light, and finally it drops a boss core. To start, I'll save the black hole as a new scene. Then I can reset the position to 0 and move it back in the main scene. Then in the script, I'll add a variable for the maximum size and set it to 6. Then I'll add an explosion function, which will just delete the black hole for now. And in set size, I'll check if the size is greater than the max size or equal to. Then I'll call the explode function and set size equal to max size. So now the black hole will disappear once it's absorbed enough bumpers. However, this will take way too long to test, so I'll increase the size in the process function instead. In process, I'll call increase size and pass the delta so it's not too fast. Now it increases, and once it gets big enough, it disappears. Now I want the black hole to destroy items as well, so I'll set the black hole area on collision layer 2 as well, so that it will affect the items which are on collision layer 2. Then in the black hole script, in the process function, I'll check first if the body is a dropped item, and change the bumper check. Then I'll make a new variable for points and set it to 10. And if the body has the points variable, set points to body.points instead. Then I'll increase the size by the points times 0.01. And since the items don't have a health bar, I'll just delete the item. Now I don't want it to get destroyed immediately when it touches the area, so I'll wait until it's about halfway into the radius. So I'll check if body position distance to global position, rather distance to the black hole's global position is less than the collision shape dot shape radius, and I'll divide that by 2, so it should get about halfway into the area before it gets destroyed. So now in the main, I'll go ahead and drag a couple items into the range of the black hole. So I'll add an ore chunk 2, although these are quite large, and see what happens. So they disappear and they get pulled in as expected. And if I move the black hole in front of the items in the inspector, above the items, now you can see they are affected by the shader as well. So now I want the black hole to get smaller as it explodes, but I don't want to hard code the maximum size in an animation, so I'll add a tween node instead. And in the explode function, call tween.interpolate property on self with the scale property, which you can see in the inspector under transform. So the initial value is scale and the final value is a 0 vector. And I want it to last for 5 seconds. Then call tween.start. And I'll connect to the all completed signal from the tween node and move the queue_free into this function. So now the black hole increases in size and then begins to shrink and eventually disappears once it reaches the maximum. Now I'll add a enumerator at the top with the grow and explode values and make a new state variable initialized to grow. Then in the functions, I'll check if the state is grow so it doesn't deal damage once the explosion starts. And in set size, and explode as well. Here I'll set the state to explode, and I also want to reverse the gravity, so I'll set that to -200 so it pushes the player out, and that is under the physics override in the inspector on the area. And only queue_free if the state equals explode. And I'll just double check to make sure everything still works, which it looks like it does. It pushes the player out as it gets smaller and disappears. Then I'll add a array for the droppable items using load. And you can drag the file name from the file manager directly into the editor. So I'll add all of the ore chunks and the health and energy pack as well to the item list. Then I'll add a timer node for the item spawning, set the wait time to 0.1 seconds and keep one shot and auto start disabled. Then in the explode function, I'll start the item timer and connect the timer's timeout signal to a spawn item function. Here I'll get a random item of type dropped item from the item list and make a new instance. Set the item position to the black hole's global position. Then use the connector auto load to add the item to the main scene. And I want the items to fly out in different directions, so I'll apply a central impulse with a new vector and set the X and Y to a random number between -500 and +500. Now the items fly out as the black hole collapses. However, the ore chunks are much too large. To fix this, I'll check if the item is an ore chunk, then set the size between 0.1 and 0.4. So now the ore chunks are much smaller. Since the items all spawn in the center, the player can hold the gravity beam in place to pick everything up. So I'll add a random offset to the item position between -500 and 500. So now it's a little more challenging to pick all the items up. Now to make the burst of light, I'll add a particles 2D and rename it. Set the texture to a vertical light beam and set the process material to a particles material. I'll turn off the gravity and set the initial velocity to around 250. Then I'll turn up the velocity random a bit as well. Then I'll turn the direction spread all the way up and enable the align Y flag so the rays point in the direction they're moving. Then I'll increase the lifetime. And to make the beams get bigger as they fly out, I'll add a new scale curve. Move the start point down almost to 0. And I also want them to fade out. So I'll add a color ramp gradient. Make a new gradient. Set the start to white and the end to transparent. Then I'll go ahead and turn the velocity up some more and increase the amount by a lot to make the light burst effect. Of course, I'll want to move the particles below the shader effect. So now it looks like the beams of light are coming out of the black hole. There are a couple issues. First, that the beams disappear when you get out of range of the black hole. And I also don't want the beams to scale as it gets smaller. To fix the visibility distance, under drawing, I'll set the visibility rectangle to -3000, -3000 on the X and Y, and 6000, 6000 on the width and height. So this is outlined in the blue box. Then under the explode function, instead of interpolating the entire area, I'll just scale the shader and the center sprite. So I'll rename that and set the default initial value. Now, I don't want to emit the light beams until the black hole collapses, so I will disable emitting, and in the explode function, I will re-enable it. This looks pretty good, but the beams of light disappear immediately when it's done, so I'll add another phase to let them finish casting. I could reuse the item timer, but it's more straightforward to add a new timer for the light phase. Set the wait time to 5 seconds, which is the lifetime of the particles, with one shot and auto start disabled. Then I'll connect the timeout signal to the black hole script, and I'll just move the queue free to here. Then I'll add a finish beams phase to the enumerator, and when the tweens have completed, if the state is collapsed, I'll set the state to finish beams, start the light timer, set the light beams emitting to false so it doesn't make any new beams, and then I'll turn off the item timer as well. Now the beams of light continue traveling after the black hole disappears. And finally, I'll make it drop a boss core. I already have the code to drop the boss cores in the spaceworm script, so I'll copy that and make a new function in the connector autoload to drop the boss cores at a given position. So I'll get an instance of the boss core scene, set the position to the past parameter, and call drop item to add the boss core to the scene. Now in the spaceworm, I can call this function and pass the head's global position to get rid of the duplication there. And in the black hole, once the explosion is done and the tweens are completed, I'll call this again at the black hole's global position. Now the black hole drops a boss core when it's done collapsing. Next, I'll add a fade-in transition to give the player some warning before it starts dealing damage. So I'll add an animation player node, make a new animation called fade in, set the duration to 5 seconds. Then in the black hole, I'll turn the alpha channel on the visibility modulate all the way down and map this to the initial value. At 1 second, I'll turn the alpha all the way back up and map that as well. Then I can select both these nodes and move the timeline to 2 seconds and duplicate the keys. So I'll do that again. So now the black hole fades in and out before it finally appears. I also want to enable autoplay on load so it starts playing immediately. Then in the script, I'll add a fade in phase to the enumerator and set the initial state to fade in. And on ready, I'll disable the collision shape and turn off the light beam emitter as well, just for good measure. I'll also get rid of the increased size in the process that I was using for testing. Then connect to the animation player's animation finished signal. Here I'll set the state to grow and re-enable the collision shape as well. So now the black hole blinks a couple times before it becomes active, and then you can start feeding it bumpers. That's all for this episode of Derp Star. Thank you for watching, and have a great day.